21st century challenges outpace 20th century institutions and mindsets. We have never had a true system undermined. Impunity is on the rise as leaders and states push the boundaries, both at home and the international arena. And we face a set of paradoxes. The world is more connected, yet societies are becoming more fragmented. Challenges are growing outward, while many people are turning inward. And multilateralism is under fire precisely when we need it most. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is true that we are moving in the direction of a multipolar world. But multipolarity will not in itself guarantee peace or solve global problems. A century ago, Europe was multipolar. A balance of power was deemed sufficient to keep rivals in check. It was not. Without strong multilateral frameworks for European-wide cooperation and problem-solving, the result was a grievous world war. And today, with shifts in the balance of power, the risk of confrontation may increase. In assessing the Peloponnesian War in ancient Greece, Thucydides said, and I quote, "It was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable." This is what the political scientist Graham Allison calls the Thucydides trap. But in his book, Destined for War, and reviewing many examples of rivalry in the past, he concluded that conflict is never inevitable. Indeed, with leadership committed to strategic cooperation and to managing competing interests, we can avoid war and steer the world onto a safer path. Individual leaders have the duty to advance the well-being of their people, but it runs deeper. Together, as guardians of the common good, we also have a duty to promote and support a reinvigorated and strengthened multilateral. We need commitment to a rules-based order, with the United Nations at its center, and with the different institutions and treaties that bring the Charter to life. And we need to show the added value of international by delivering peace, defending human rights, and driving economic and social progress for women and men everywhere. And that is why I'm so committed to reform and to making the United Nations more effective in responding to the needs and aspirations of the peoples. In the face of massive existential threats to people and planet, but equal at a time of compelling opportunities for shared prosperity, there is no way forward but collective action for the common good. This is how we can rebuild trust. Excellencies, in my address last year, I highlighted 7 challenges. 1 year on, they remain sadly unresolved. There is outrage at our inability to end the wars in Syria, Yemen, and elsewhere. The Rohingya people remain exiled, traumatized, and in misery, still yearning for safety and justice. Palestinians and Israelis are still locked in endless conflict, with the two-state solution more and more distant. The threat of terror looms, fed by the root causes of radicalization and violent extremism. And terrorism is ever more interlinked with international organized crime and the trafficking of people, drugs, arms, and corruption. The nuclear peril has not eased, with non-proliferation at serious risk. Nuclear-armed states are modernizing their arsenals, a new arms race could be triggered, and the threshold for their use lowered. We have seen outrageous use of chemical weapons in full impunity, despite their ban. And protection against dangerous biological weapons are weak. Inequality is undermining faith in the social contract, and it's a clear obstacle to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And tensions over trade are on the rise. Migrants and refugees continue to face discrimination and demagoguery in the context of clearly insufficient international cooperation. And in this marking of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the human rights agenda is losing ground and authoritarianism is on the rise. As the politics of pessimism spreads, we must guard against self-fulfilling prophecies. Those who see their neighbors as dangerous may cause a threat where there was none. Those who close their borders to regular migration only fuel the work of traffickers. And those who ignore human rights in combating terrorism tend to breed the very extremism they are trying to end.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is our common duty to reverse these trends and resolve these challenges. We need to move ahead based on facts, not fear, on reason, not illusion. Prevention must be at the center of all we do. And this session of the General Assembly is a unique opportunity to move forward. To mention just one example, I welcome the strong show of support for my Action for Peacekeeping initiative, which has been endorsed by over 146 states and regional organizations. It aims to help our missions succeed in today's protracted and volatile contexts. Concentrate on two epochal challenges which since last year have taken on surpassing urgency: climate change and the new risks associated with advances in technology. Let me take each of them in turn. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first, let's touch upon what is a direct existential threat, and that is climate change. We have reached a pivotal moment. If we do not change course in the next 2 years, we risk runaway climate change. Climate change is moving faster than we are, and its unbridled speed has sent alarm bells ringing across our world. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the past 2 decades have included 18 of the warmest years on record since record-keeping began in 1850. A few weeks ago, the thickest and supposedly the most solid section of sea ice located in the north of Greenland began to break up for the first time. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the highest in 3 million years, and it's rising. Making matters worse, we, as a community of world leaders, are not doing enough. We must listen to the Earth's best scientists. We must see what is happening before our eyes, and we need greater ambition and a greater sense of urgency. We must guarantee the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It has immense potential to set us on the right course, but its targets, which represent the bare minimum to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, are far from being met. I am concerned that recent negotiations in Bangkok towards implementation guidelines ended without sufficient progress. The next Conference of Parties, COP24, in Poland this December, will be a key moment. It must be a success. As I said recently, we cannot allow Katowice to remind us of the divisions among member states that paralyzed Copenhagen. The good news is technology is on our side. Clean energy is more competitive than ever. If we pursue the right path, climate action could add $26 billion to the global economy by 2030. Green economy policies could create 24 million new jobs. More and more companies and investors are finding that green business is good business. Far from being a fundamental threat to the economy, climate action is generating new industries, new markets, more jobs, and less dependency on fossil fuels. The real danger doesn't come from acting. It is instead the risk to one's economy by failing to act. Governments need to be courageous and smart. That means ending billions of dollars in subsidies for fossil fuels. It means establishing a fair price for carbon. It means stopping investments in unsustainable infrastructure that lock in bad practices for decades to come. Our future is at stake. Nothing is immune. Climate change affects everything. Everything can be undermined. Keeping our planets warming to well below 2 degrees is essential for global prosperity and the security of nations. That is why, next September, I will convene a climate summit to mobilize action and finance. We will bring together countries and cities, the stakeholders of the real economy, decision makers, business, finance, and civil society, to focus on the heart of the problem. The summit will take place 1 year before countries have to revise their national climate pledges under the Paris Agreement, and these pledges will need to go further. Only a significantly higher level of ambition will do, and the summit will be an opportunity for leaders and partners to showcase their ambition. To make this possible, we must act without delay. The world needs you to be climate champions, all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn to new technologies and what we can do to uphold their promise, but to keep their perils at bay. And there is indeed great promise. Scientific progress has helped to cure deadly diseases, to feed growing populations, to drive economic growth, and connect business, communities, families, and friends across the world. Rapidly developing fields such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and biotechnology have the potential to turbocharge progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Artificial intelligence is connecting people across languages and supporting doctors in making better diagnoses. Driverless vehicles will revolutionize transportation. But there are also risks and serious dangers. Technological advances may disrupt labor markets as traditional jobs change or disappear, even as the number of young job seekers continues to grow. Retraining will be needed at previously unimaginable scales. Education must adapt from the earliest grades, and the very nature of work will change. Governments may have to consider stronger safety nets and, eventually, universal basic income. At the same time, technology is being misused by terrorists and for sexual exploitation and abuse. Organized criminal networks lurk on the dark web, profiting from encryption and near-anonymous cryptocurrency payments to traffic in people and illegal goods. Some reports estimate that cybercrime is now putting $1.5 trillion in the pockets of cybercriminals annually. And malicious acts in cyberspace, such as disinformation campaigns, are polarizing that echo their views, reinforce tribalism, and assure people that they are right and the other side is wrong. And the digital revolution is also being used to discriminate against women and reinforce our male-dominated culture. Indeed, there is a deep gender gap in access to digital technologies, widening the digital divide. We must dismantle obstacles and create opportunities for women, ensuring equality and change online and toxic corporate cultures. The technology sector must open up and become more diverse, not least for its own benefit. With technology outracing institutions, cooperation between countries and among stakeholders will be crucial, including member states, the private sector, research centers, civil society, and academia. There are many mutually beneficial solutions for digital challenges. We need urgently to find a way to apply them. At United Nations, we are harnessing technologies in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are creating innovation labs, including in my office. And in July, I established a high-level panel on digital cooperation that met yesterday, and that is a dialogue platform for all key actors. Excellencies, the impacts of new technologies on warfare are a direct threat to our common responsibility to guarantee peace and security. The weaponization of artificial intelligence is a growing concern. The prospect of weapons that can select and attack a target on their own raises multiple alarms and could trigger new arms races. Diminished oversight of weapons has implications for our efforts to contain threats, to prevent escalation, and to adhere to international humanitarian and human rights law. And let's call it as it is. The prospect of machines with the discretion and power to take human life is morally repugnant. Heaven forbid, any new war could very well include a massive cyber attack, not only targeting military capacities, but also critical civilian infrastructure. I'm encouraged by the 10 possible guiding principles elaborated in Geneva last month by the group of governmental experts on lethal autonomous weapons system. More work on these issues aimed at building trust between and within nations will be needed if we are to ensure the responsible use of new technologies. And I urge you to use the United Nations as a platform to draw global attention to these crucial matters and to nurture a digital future that is safe and beneficial for all. Excellencies, despite the chaos and confusion in our world, I see winds of hope blowing around the globe. Just days ago, I witnessed the signing of a historic peace agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea in Saudi Arabia. Soon after, the presidents of Djibouti and Eritrea met in Jeddah to launch a peace process. Eritrea and Somalia have established diplomatic relations. And in the same region, in the context of a summit of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, the two rival leaders in South Sudan have finally signed a peace agreement. I'm hopeful that these efforts will continue to be consolidated so that the people of the Horn of Africa can finally turn the page on war and conflict. The courageous initiative of the Singapore Summit between the leaders of the United States and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, along with the recent meeting of the two Korean leaders in Pyongyang, offers hope for the possibility of a full and verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in a context of regional security. In my recent visit to Colombia, I was impressed by the people's strong commitment to peace, now reaffirmed by President Duque. In Central Asia, I personally witnessed strengthened cooperation among states after Uzbekistan went through a peaceful political transition. Greece and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia have taken a major step towards resolving their differences. Our peacekeeping mission in Liberia ended a decade and a half of work this year following the country's first peaceful democratic transition, adding to peacekeeping successes elsewhere in West Africa. The approval of a compact on refugees and another on migration represents signs of hope, even if there is still a long way to go to reconcile full respect for the rights of people on the move with the legitimate interests of states. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of extreme poverty across the world the past 3 decades, and we averted looming famine in the 4 countries impacted in the past 2 years. Armenia's young people were at the heart of the country's peaceful political transition earlier this year, showing the potential of youth to use their voice to advance democracy. And the drive for gender equality is gaining ground amid a growing awareness of pervasive discrimination against women and girls, from violence, harassment, and exploitation to unequal pay and exclusion from decision-making. The United Nations must lead the way in pursuit of gender equality. For the first time in the United Nations history, there is full parity in our senior management group and among resident coordinators leading country teams around the world. And we are firmly committed to equality and empowerment everywhere. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as our Secretary General Kofi Annan once reminded us, we share, I'm quoting, a common destiny. We can master it only if we face it together. And that, my friends, is why we have the United Nations. End of quote. Our future rests on solidarity. We must repair broken trust. We must reinvigorate our multilateral project. And we must uphold dignity for one and for all. Thank you very much.
I thank the Secretary General for his statement. La Asamblea pasará ahora.
Now, the General Assembly will now turn to Agenda Item 8, entitled General Debate.
Okay.
Jefes de Estado.
Heads of State and of Government, distinguished ministers, Your Excellencies, Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, my dear friends, it is for me a genuine honor to welcome you all to the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. Welcome to the only place where a meeting of this kind is possible. Only this Assembly, as the main deliberative and representative body of the United Nations, offers to all the peoples and leaders of the world the opportunity to hear and be heard on an equal footing. Your Excellencies, the contribution made by the United Nations to humanity has been immense. International law, the promotion of peace, human rights, protection standards for the environment, the Sustainable Development Goals, and those preeminent principles that govern international coexistence were born in this very General Assembly. The reality is that the work of the United Nations is as relevant today as it was 73 years ago. Multilateralism stands alone as the only viable response to the global problems that we are faced with. To undermine multilateralism or to cast doubt upon its merits will only lead to instability and division, to mistrust and polarization. Around the world, millions of people are suffering from violence, war, from want, and from the effects of climate change. For those millions of human beings, uncertainty and fear are their daily lot. Inequality has deprived many societies of hope and of opportunity. These crushed dreams and this lack of any hope in the future is exploited by some to further divide our communities, stirring up racism, xenophobia and violence, which represent the very antithesis of the purpose of the Charter that we adopted in 1945. Your Excellencies, none of us can be unmoved by human suffering. War, conflict, economic crises, and the environmental degradation affect us all, irrespective of rank or circumstance. We live in an interconnected world, leaving us no choice but to pursue global dialogue and a multilateral response. For this reason, I have proposed that we re-galvanize the multilateral agenda with a rekindled sense of purpose on the basis of three principles: global leadership, shared responsibilities, and collective action. Global leadership to identify joint solutions to global problems and to take the appropriate and timely decisions to solve said problems. Shared responsibility because we all have a common cause, that of nurturing social cohesion and human dignity, but also of protecting the health and well-being of our planet. And collective action because the most sensitive problems facing humanity are of concern to all of us. I would invite you to draw inspiration from the ancient Andean principle of Minga, which refers to collective construction and shared labor to derive benefit for the entire community. Let us therefore forge a global Minga movement for the construction of more peaceful and equitable societies, societies that are more sustainable and resilient. Your Excellencies, this year I ask you to work together around 7 priorities. The first priority of this General Assembly will be gender equality and the empowerment of women, a debt that we owe to more than half of the world's population, and in its current state an injustice that acts as an impediment on global development. Achieving the economic and productive inclusion of women could add a further 11% to global GDP by 2025. Most regrettably, violence against women persists in all regions of the world. Girls are still not offered full access to quality information and education, tools which help to break down inequalities. The second priority shall be the implementation of the new global agreements on migration and refugees for the well-being of those 260 migrants and the almost 25 million refugees who have been ripped from their homes by conflict and violence. The creation of decent work opportunities for all, for every man and every woman, is the third priority, and it represents one of the most significant challenges for public policy making, for development, and for the sustainability over the long term of our social security and welfare systems. Fourth, we shall work to ensure due and proper attention is paid to the protection of the environment and to making headway in implementing agreements to curb climate change, including the Paris Agreement. Extreme heat waves, forest fires, storms and floods are leaving in their wake a trail of death and devastation. In August of this year, Kerala State in India suffered its worst monsoon floods in recent history, leaving 400 dead and driving 1 million more from their homes. Hurricanes have killed thousands of persons in 2017, making them one of the most deadly extreme weather phenomena in history. We bear a responsibility to reverse, as a matter of urgency, policies and patterns of production and consumption that are killing our planet. I have proposed highlighting the problem of plastic pollution to shed light upon this as a widespread environmental issue and threat which affects the health and the well-being of people around the world. The flotsam and jetsam of plastic waste in the Pacific Ocean measures more than 4 times the size of Germany. It is 3 times larger than France, and it represents a silent but very present threat to the Pacific coasts of the United States. The fifth priority is the importance of firming up political and social commitment to persons with disability and delivering on that commitment. There is still a need to heighten awareness about the specific needs of this group in society. Accessibility, inclusive and quality education, and dignified jobs are challenges faced by the planet's largest minority, to wit, disabilities. Priority number 6 will be the revitalization of the United Nations, and here we shall work on 3 tracks: the implementation of the reforms to the system, the strengthening of the process of revitalization of the General Assembly to optimize its methods of work and to expand its deliberative and decision-making role, and thirdly, we shall continue with the reform process of the Security Council as a reflection of the will and determination of states. Priority number 7 shall be peace and security and the role of young people in conflict prevention. This Assembly must set itself the lofty goal of becoming the chief peace-building body in the world, following a preventive approach. Lasting peace and sustained peace must be rooted in dialogue and understanding. Facilitating such a dialogue will be my top priority. The General Assembly must champion initiatives to ensure that young people enjoy greater opportunities and a greater role in political participation, to avoid abandoning them to a path that leads inexorably to violent extremism. Your Excellencies, peace and security are one of the cornerstones of the work of this House, the United Nations. The most bitter conflicts and disputes are resolved through dialogue, through rapprochement, through generosity, and through mutual understanding, and that includes when the differences of opinion are religious or cultural. Over the last few months, some of you gathered here today have taken significant and welcome steps towards understanding and peace, which should encourage your peers and should be hailed by us all. In July, the President of Eritrea and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia signed a joint declaration on peace and friendship to put an end to decades of conflict between those two countries. The drums of war have been silenced, and diplomatic relations and ties of transport, trade and communication are being steadily resumed. Similarly, recently, the Panmunjom Declaration for the Peace, Prosperity and Unification of the Korean Peninsula was adopted between the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Both nations agreed to work together to put an end to decades of war and of conflict. This represents a historic milestone, presaging a new era of peace and presaging the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Both of these events cause hope to burn bright in a world in which many conflicts still lack a peaceful solution. Your Excellencies, the challenges taken up by the Charter of the United Nations have evolved. The threats of climate change, the disappearance of biodiversity, human trafficking, environmental pollution, mass displacement, both of migrants as well as of refugees, terrorism and ethnically based conflicts are now at the top of our agenda. We have passed headlong into a technological and digital era which has led to economic, social and cultural exchanges that were not even dreamed of a scant few decades ago, which pose also challenges which this organisation will have to be better positioned. It is for that reason that we have to make progress in the implementation of the reforms to the United Nations system that are proposed. We want a more efficient and open rather than tone-deaf organisation that reflects the political and economic reality of a changing world. The leadership and commitment of the states and of the Secretary-General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, is a boon when it comes to taking decisive steps towards these reforms of the UN system. We must hold to our vision and commitment to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Only by thus doing can we ensure that all people can live in dignity and in peace. I would invite you to pay particular attention to the vulnerabilities of those countries in unique and special situations where extra efforts must be made in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm speaking here of small island developing states, landlocked countries, and least developed countries, all of whom, as individual nations and groups, should benefit from the fruit of our shared responsibility to achieve. Your Excellencies, I affirm my commitment to Africa and its peoples. We will do our utmost to speed up the achievement of the Africa Development Programme. Let us not simply talk about Africa, act together with Africa. One of the outstanding challenges before this organisation is that of achieving a definitive and lasting peace in the Middle East through the implementation of the resolutions that we have adopted within this Assembly.
Excellencies, this year we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The fight for human rights remains a challenge in the world. 70 years ago, a great woman led the work of the Human Rights Commission in charge of drafting the Universal Declaration, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. One of her phrases illustrates in a simple way why we must work to bring this organization and its decisions closer to our peoples. Mrs. Roosevelt pointed out, and I quote, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the family, farm or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerned citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. End of quote. Excelencias, quisiera...
Your Excellencies, I would like to inaugurate the 73rd session of the General Assembly with a heartfelt appeal to the leaders of the world to rise to meet the needs of our people and to not lose heart in your attempts to a more peaceful world, a safer world, and a more humane world, where every person can find their place with dignity. In so doing, let us proceed to build a United Nations that shall be more relevant to all people. Thank you very much.
Before giving the floor to the first speaker for this morning, I would like to remind members that the list of speakers for the general debate has been established on the agreed basis that statements should be no longer than 15 minutes to enable all the speakers to be heard at a given meeting. Within this time frame, I would like to appeal to speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation in the other official United Nations languages may be provided properly. I would also like to draw your attention to the decision taken by the General Assembly at previous sessions, namely that the practice of expressing congratulations inside the General Assembly hall after a speech has been delivered is strongly discouraged. In this connection, after delivering their statements, speakers are invited to exit the General Assembly hall through room GA 200, located behind the podium, before returning to their seats. May I take it that the General Assembly agrees to proceed in the same manner during the general debate of the 73rd session? It is so decided. Finally, I would like to draw to the attention of members that during the general debate, official photographs of all the speakers are taken by the Department of Public Information. Members interested in obtaining these photographs are requested to contact the Photo Library of the United Nations. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Michel Temer, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
En nombre de la Asamblea General, tengo el...
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Michel Temer, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, and to invite him to address the Assembly. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
Madam President of this General Assembly, Maria Espinosa, Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Antonio Guterres, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen at large. It gives Brazil great pleasure, and it is an honor for us to officially open this general debate session. It is my pleasure to greet the chairperson of the General Assembly, Madam President Maria Espinosa, the very first Latin American woman to perform this high-ranking function at the United Nations. May I reiterate to you Madam, my very best wishes for a most successful job, and be certain to count on Brazil. Greetings likewise to Secretary General Antonio Guterres. I am particularly pleased to greet you, Secretary, in our common language. Ladies and gentlemen, how many speakers have thus far come up to this podium to call for and advocate improvements to the international order that we have built throughout the decades? There have certainly been many such speakers, myself included. And I believe we were right, and we still are right. And I also believe that the words we uttered remain current and very much up to date. However, if we really want to improve our international and collective order, yet another task is required today, i.e., the task of advocating the very integrity of the order. An order which, however imperfect it may be, has nevertheless served to foster humankind's overarching causes. The challenges to the integrity of the current international order are many. We live in times clouded by isolationist forces. Old forms of intolerance are being rekindled. Unilateral relapses are today increasingly less of an exception. However, these challenges should not and cannot possibly intimidate us. Isolationism, intolerance, unilateralism. We must respond to each of these different trends with the very best of our peoples. Brazil has responded to the first of these trends, isolationism, with more openness, more integration. Brazil is keenly aware that our shared development ultimately depends on more international trade and investment flows. It depends on more contact with new ideas, new technologies. It is precisely by remaining opening to others that we will build a truly shared prosperity, and not by turning inwardly or to isolation. And this is how Brazil has acted. We have carried out a universalist foreign policy. In our geographical region, we have worked to deepen integration mechanisms. In the Mercosur bloc of countries, for example, we have underscored the bloc's democratic calling. We have knocked down trade barriers and entered into new agreements. We have also drawn closer ties with countries of the Pacific Alliance, thereby fostering an increasingly united Latin America, as is enshrined in the Brazilian Federal Constitution. We have either strengthened or started trade talks and negotiations with partners from all regions: the European Union, the European Free Trade Association, Canada, South Korea, Singapore, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia. Through these and other initiatives, we have increasingly drawn closer and closer ties with the Americas at large, as well as Europe, Asia, and Africa. Brazil's participation in cooperation fora, such as G20, BRICS, the Portuguese-speaking community of countries, has been particularly productive and fruitful. These are fora where we have worked to produce tangible results that have a direct impact on the everyday life of our societies. And this is how, through openness and integration, we have moved closer to a better future for all. Isolation may even give one a false sense of security at first. Protectionism may even sound seductive, but it is through openness and integration that we can actually achieve harmony, growth, and progress for all. Ladies and gentlemen, Brazil has also responded in a resolute manner to the challenge of intolerance by means of dialogue and solidarity. Dialogue and solidarity are the values that inspire us to repeatedly honor the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document will soon, as has been said before, will soon celebrate 7 decades, and making it a reality remains an imperative that requires permanent attention and efforts. In the name of human rights, much has already been done by governments, institutions, and individuals of the stature of Brazilian national Sérgio Vieira de Mello, whose memory I wish to honor, as 2018 marks the 15 years of his tragic death. One must nevertheless recognize and admit that violations of international norms still can be found in several different places. The international norms that protect individuals and human integrity. In Latin America, Brazil has worked to preserve democracy and human rights. Working together with so many other countries, we will continue to stand side by side with our brotherly peoples who have suffered so much. Dialogue and solidarity are also at the very origin of the Global Compact for Migration, whose negotiations we have just completed. There are currently more than 250 million migrants all over the world. These are men, women, children who have been threatened by lingering crises and are ultimately led to make the difficult and risky decision to leave their homelands. It is our duty to protect them, and this is the purpose of the Global Compact for Migration. It is now our task to complete the ongoing negotiations of the Global Pact on Refugees. In South America in particular, as you know, we are currently experiencing a large-scale migration wave. It is estimated that more than 1 million Venezuelan nationals have thus far left their country of origin in search of better and more decent living conditions. Brazil has welcomed all migrants who have arrived in our territory. We're talking about tens of thousands of Venezuelan nationals to whom we have sought to provide all assistance. In collaboration with the United Nations High Commissioner's Office for Refugees, we have built shelters to accommodate them as best possible. We have also, ladies and gentlemen, arranged for them to be taken to other regions of Brazil. We have also issued formal documents that enable them to actually work in Brazil. We have also offered schooling opportunities for children, plus vaccination and health care to all of them. But we know that the solution to the migration crisis will be forthcoming when our neighboring country, Venezuela, again finds the path to development. In Brazil, we are proud of our tradition of hospitality. We are, after all, a country that was made out of diversity. There's actually a piece of the world in every Brazilian national. Faithful and in line with this tradition, last year we enacted a new migration law, a modern, up-to-date piece of legislation that not only protects migration or migrants' dignity, but also recognizes the benefits of migration. We have also expanded rights, and we have streamlined requirements to enter and stay in Brazil as a migrant. And since dialogue and solidarity are antidotes that help us fight intolerance and bigotry, they are also the very cornerstone of long-lasting peace. In view of the different crises facing the Middle East, this has been the cornerstone of the Brazilian position. This year, we joined the ongoing celebrations of Israel's 70th anniversary, and Brazil renews its support to the two-state solution. Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and in security. We have further supported international efforts to put an end to the ongoing conflict in Syria, a conflict that has been going on for too much time. We have sought to help mitigate so much suffering. In 2017 alone, to give you one example, Brazil donated nearly 1 ton of medicines and vaccines to assist the children affected by the conflict in Syria. We have also welcomed and accommodated a substantial number of refugees from Syria. in the Korean Peninsula, as mentioned earlier, a sense of dialogue and solidarity have also informed our position. We reiterate our support to diplomatic solutions that will promote denuclearization and peace. And as I said before, it is through dialogue and solidarity that we will overcome intolerance and build peace. Nelson Mandela, whose centenary we celebrate this year, said that it is our duty to strive towards a world of tolerance and respect for difference, and work towards an unswerving, unwavering commitment to peaceful solutions to conflicts and disputes. Lastly, we have before us the challenge of unilateralism. We have responded to that challenge by means of more diplomacy, more multilateralism. And we have done so with the strong conviction that collective problems require collectively coordinated responses. Hence, the overarching meaning and purpose of the United Nations as an organization. After all, this is by definition, and first and foremost, the house for mutual understanding. We must strengthen this organization. We must make it increasingly legitimate and effective. And that is why we also need important reforms to be carried out, including that of the Security Council, which, as it is today in its current configuration, reflects a world that no longer exists. In sum, we must also reinvigorate the values of democracy and of the multilateral system. We have repeatedly proved that together we are able of doing a great deal when these values guide our actions. This is how we have taken a historical step last year by completing the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. I myself had the honor of being the very first head of state to sign that treaty. And that is how, in the course of decades, we have built a multilateral system of trade, a robust multilateral system of trade with increasingly comprehensive rules and endowed with a credible and effective dispute settlement mechanism. These are historical achievements that all of us have achieved or accomplished, and which we should all honor and broaden by eliminating so many distortions to agricultural trade which have affected above all developing countries. And it is not only in matters involving disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation or international trade that diplomacy and the multilateral system can provide us with actual solutions. It is also true and applies to so many other fields of human activity, such as, for instance, sustainable development, which is really critical for the future of humankind. Only in the past few years have we negotiated the 2030 Development Agenda and the Paris Agreement. These are absolutely key milestones that do position us properly in the path towards economic growth, coupled with social justice and respect for the environment. Brazil's priority and special commitment to sustainable development remains unmistakable. Examples abound. We are fully engaged in the ongoing movement